morning, everybody. My name is Jim Walker. I work at Portworx. I'm honored today to be up here on this panel talking to some distinguished analysts from our field. I don't know if this is like the only non-technical session in the whole summit, so I guess everybody here is technical. There's a lot of technical stuff, by the way. The Hadoop market has grown wildly over the past couple years, and I think these guys have all been in tune with what's been going on in this market fairly well. I've been following each one of them from your left to my right. Mike, starting with Mike here. Starting with Mike Gualtieri. Mike Gualtieri actually wrote Mike and Noel wrote the very first, large analyst firm published analysis of the Hadoop market, right?
The Forrester Wave on Hadoop.
Yep. In October. So he's done some great work. He knows the vendors in and out. He knows exactly what's going on in the marketplace. Tony, you've been analyzing data and data management for quite some time. I just won't even go too deep into that, but
please don't.
What's that?
Please don't.
Yeah. Tony Barrett, Ovum Research, has done some great work, and anytime he publishes anything, a lot of the world listens. And then finally on the far end is Jeff Kelly. Jeff Kelly was also our moderator this morning. Thank you, Jeff, for that great moderation of that panel, by the way. Jeff Kelly works at Wikibon. As a vendor in this marketplace, of course, we're looking at numbers to see where other vendors are in the space. Very rarely have I found anybody who's kind of pegged the market as well as Jeff has. Some of his research into what he thinks different companies are doing in this space, seminal work, and if you haven't read it, I would absolutely implore you to do so. If you really want to understand this market, I think Jeff's got a great handle on where this is going. So, I'm going to start with a softball of a question for you guys. I sat in the panel this morning. So is it Hadoop or Hadoop or Hodoop or what? So Mike, what is it?
Hadoop.
Hadoop, Tony?
Yeah.
Giddy up.
Giddy up. Jeff?
I go with Hadoop.
All right. I don't know if it's Hadoop or Hadoop anymore, but so that's the easy question. We talked about this for a while yesterday. So the first question I want to throw out to these guys is really about Hadoop in the enterprise. I'm going to open it up to the floor for other questions as well. Yeah, sure. I guess, okay. You bet. So Hadoop in the enterprise. Great. So what will it take for Hadoop to become a first-class citizen in the enterprise? We've heard a lot of talk about this over the past couple days. And really, what will it take, but maybe is it already? So let's start with Mike, if you give us your opinion.
Well, I would say yes, it is already for many firms, right? Many firms, we did a survey, I think it was November, and it showed 45% of enterprises were doing some sort of POC, right? So it was a science fair project. That's the lion's share from those respondents. 16% were in production. So it's still relatively new, but for those companies that are in production, it is a first-class citizen. I mean, they're using it for mission-critical analytical applications. The inquiries that I get have all transformed from sort of definitional, what is Hadoop, where's it going, to really more concrete questions about how to implement it, what are the best practices, what are the use cases. So I think the momentum is there, and there's a sweet spot in every enterprise for Hadoop, but the ecosystem has to grow up a lot more. When you look at all of the tools to make Hadoop work inside an enterprise, that ecosystem is just starting to grow up. And if you look at all the sub-projects, which the Hadoop community points out, most of those sub-projects are Hadoop-centric. But that's not the only thing in an enterprise, right? It has a large data management environment. So you need tools that can manage the traditional stuff and also Hadoop.
Right. Tony, what's your opinion?
Well, this has been just an ongoing theme of our research. And that, just put another way, Hadoop has to become a normal system. It has to become part of the IT environment, has to map to your IT organization, the data center, and the business. That said, I couldn't agree more with Mike. We convened a conference of our clients in London about a month ago. We're a London-based firm. Admittedly, London is a bit of a hot spot, but still, I don't think that adoption is quite as far advanced as is here, but yet, at the session, admittedly it was a self-selected sample. There were probably about 50 or 60 people in the audience. And I asked, what proportion of you were either had basically some sort of big data project either in production or we're ramping up. And we made some definitions there, and fully about a quarter of the hands in the room went up, which really kind of, just really blew me away. So, I mean, it certainly is happening. That said, there are several things that really need to fall into place for Hadoop to become a first-class citizen in the enterprise, and big data as well. And one, obviously, is the development of the ecosystem that Mike is referring to. And that was very much instrumental in, by the way, if you look back in history, of what made essentially civilized BI and data warehousing. I kind of sort of have an old anecdote, which is that I was at one of the last DB expos, one of the last, actually it was the last big one in San Francisco. It was back in 1996. I remember that because my wife and I had a lovely vacation up with Sonoma right before that. And I got a call from this, from this PR firm that said, we have this client that we'd love to introduce you to, but they're too small to exhibit at DB Expo. And so I said, okay, that's fine. Could you go up to the hotel room the day before? And it turned out that client was Informatica. And I saw, what became PowerMart, eventually Power Center, and I was just blown away. Is that here they took this process that was manual, scripting, kind of mysterious, and made this visual and made this look like a data modeling tool. It looked like the types of tools that basically that DBAs and data developers were using. And that's exactly what needs to happen with Hadoop, which is this is the ecosystem. It has to become easy to use. It has to stop becoming programmer, developer, and statistician centric. Yes, they are definitely a necessary part of big data analytics, but if you're going to popularize this has to become, something that is addressed more with tools. But the other things, there are a number of things with regard to being a first-class citizen in the data center, being security, being resource management. The fact is that, I don't know if this is still true, but in the early days, Yahoo was content to run its clusters at, say, like 15, 20% utilization, which was fine because the overall goal of increasing ad clicks was worth it. That's just not going to cut it for the average enterprise, which is going to be a lot more capital constrained, even if you are using cloud. So a number of things like that need to fall into place.
Yeah. So Tony, before I move on to Jeff, that's the Informatica example is, I think, a great example. It was a bit of an elongated curve, though, right? It took a while for that sort of tooling to move from 1996 to really where it became a kind of established, general piece of any data architecture, right? What are we looking at for Hadoop? Are we a year out? Are we 8? Are we, what are you thinking it is?
Well, I'm seeing, it was just amazing. It's just the rapid growth of the ecosystem, and I've just been charting the number of vendors that have been showing. It's sort of a data point, how many vendors are actually showing up to exhibit. And you can see here, you've almost,
88.
But is that almost like double or 40 or 50%, more year on year? So we're seeing basically, it's not quite, geometric growth yet, but it's getting there. I'd say basically within about 3 years, we're going to have a critical mass ecosystem. There's still a number of gaps to be filled, but we're definitely on the right trajectory.
And so, Jeff, the same question back to you, right? Hadoop in the enterprise, first-class citizen. I'd also kind of like to understand, from your point of view, I know you're a bit more metric-oriented than everybody else. You are the only guy with a tie here in the room, too, I think. Yeah, I still think so, Jeff. Still representing. There's got to be a Brit out here somewhere, no? Metrics as well, if it is a first-class citizen, how many organizations out there are treating it that way? And what is it going to take? It's still the original question.
Well, I think, from my perspective, I agree there are certain things from a technology perspective that have to happen. We've heard a lot about that over the last couple of days at this conference around governance and security, making sure that Hadoop can integrate seamlessly with the rest of your infrastructure, and there's different players in the market helping companies do that. But I think more than that, what's really going to, what needs to happen for Hadoop to really become a first-class citizen is you've got to get the attention of the business. When some of these POCs start going into production at name brand, more traditional companies, and their competitors see that they're getting passed by, fear can be quite a motivator. And when you've got the attention of the CEO and the C-level, that there's a lot of lip service today about, we've got to be data-driven, but when they actually see that they're getting passed in the market because they're not utilizing data to the extent that they can and that they need to, that's when technologies like Hadoop because of the mandate from above, will become a first-class citizen, in my opinion.
I think that one of the one of the technical drivers that's going to make it more valuable to the business, of course, is SQL on Hadoop, right? And making that compliant, making it fast.
I like to think of SQL in Hadoop, but you know.
SQL on, in, but I mean, Hadoop requires data. And where is that data?
Right.
Where is that data? It's in relational databases. And that's why, most of the conversation I have with clients has to do with structured data. 18 months ago, 2 years ago, it was unstructured because, Hadoop HDFS is a file system. You can put any old file in there that you want. But where's their data? It's relational. And we did a survey. We asked companies, hey, how much data are you analyzing of your existing data? And they said 12%. So there's a big frontier of data that they're not even analyzing. And most of that is structured. So I'm not saying that unstructured isn't important, but once you start getting faster SQL, all of a sudden, all those tools that the business is already using, the business intelligence tools, the visualization tools, the applications, all of a sudden, Hadoop becomes a way to unlock that.
Yeah, I think it lights up the ecosystem.
Yeah.
We were joking the other day. I said, 4 years ago, JDBC on Hive was not a big data strategy, right? So,
Yeah.
so let's actually talk about data. It's a great point, Mike. And structured, unstructured, the whole concept. When we go talk to people, we're typically talking about data. They know their business better than I know their business, for sure. I'm no oil and gas expert or healthcare expert. Yeah. What are the types of data that people are talking about? What are they using? Let's go with Tony, I guess.
Well, I mean, it does definitely start with structured data. And the thing is that, there's just been a lot. I mean, last year, there was basically a lot of, SQL is the big new piece of ground which all the vendors need to, plant their stake. And this year, it's that, here's the reality, and here are all the competing benchmarks. Someone came up with the term benchmarking, great term. I've probably been used many times before. It's an obvious bridge. And so, so clearly, if you're looking at SQL, it means instead of going back, say, 1 year of data, you're going back 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 10 years. And what's kind of neat, especially if you're any type of financial marketing or consumer marketing, actually any type of marketing or sales, is that brings you through not just the recent past, it brings you through several economic cycles. So now you have data where you can kind of make real historical comparisons as opposed to making best guesses. So that's pretty powerful. That said, and this is going to be the tough road to hoe. I just put out a post this morning on this, that my hope is that SQL becomes the gateway drug to Hadoop. And what I mean by that is it's an obvious bridge. I mean, if you're going to work with your developers, you're not about to replace them overnight by going out to your nearest college or university and trying to recruit all these all these Python programmers, all these statisticians, and hopefully get 1 or 2 data scientists. That's just not going to happen. It doesn't make sense. You'll hopefully recruit some that will basically enrich your staff if you can find them. But obviously, you need to appeal. You need to basically, your SQL developers, that's your fact of life, that's your data. But there is other data. And there's other things you can do with that data. You might bring it into SQL. You might extend SQL. Or maybe even you might be using some tools, some BI tools, that don't use SQL. We have several examples at this conference, like Platform or Datamir, and I expect to see a lot more of them. The fact is, you'll be doing things types of analytics that they're kind of cumbersome in SQL, like going through like thousands of table joins, for instance, like path analysis, decision trees. Even getting into what Merv was referring to yesterday, graph. I'm convinced that graph is the killer application. Well, it could be the next killer application for big data if only we could settle on some consensus, I hate to say standards, but at least where we get some critical mass of developers behind a language, behind a data format. That's begging for it. Streaming, also as well. So there are all these other things that we can put into our arsenal here. Obviously, you need to start someplace, and the logical starting place is SQL, but I'm hoping that we can expand from there.
So a little bit, so Hadoop #1 is a class 1 drug, is what you're saying. And then, I think looking at data year over year, say on Black Friday, how interesting, right? So, Jeff.
To some extent, it depends on the industry you're in. But I think what we're seeing, like the other panelists have mentioned, certainly structured data. A lot of companies do start there, but we're seeing a lot of interest in essentially that machine-generated data. Any organization that's got an infrastructure supporting processes, wants to get a better view of that data to improve efficiencies, for network security, those kinds of things. So that's one area that I think applies to kind of a broad spectrum of companies across verticals. Then of course, I think social media data kind of gets a lot of buzz, and that's important certainly for marketing type use cases, kind of keeping your finger on the pulse of a given market and things like that. But I think really the lower hanging fruit is some of that machine data that's streaming out of your data center today, and taking advantage of that. So that's where we're seeing some significant momentum. And then the challenge, I think, is regardless of the data type, it's when you start to blend data sources and when you try to do analysis of multiple types of disparate data. The feedback we're getting from the Wikibon community is that is one of the tougher challenges, is bringing that into a central place and transforming that data into a suitable format for some type of analysis.
Right.
So whatever it is, that is a major challenge.
It's an interesting point. And Mike, I'll be interested to hear your opinion on that as well. Taking one set of data in Hadoop and putting some sort of analytic function on top of that is typically where people start. The whole concept of this journey to the data lake, putting multiple different sets of data in there, all the different engines, everything we've heard in the keynotes for the past 2 days, very compelling, very interesting. What's the intersection of data going on out there, Mike? Are people really combining different sets of data that we've never kind of combined before and extracting some sort of value out of it? Are they doing it?
That's a very common use case, actually. So large telecommunication companies been doing churn analysis for 10 years, right? Doing it in a data warehouse. But these telecommunication companies, they have cable TV, they have other channels, right, with other data, web data. So they want to do that churn analysis. They want to use web behavior, viewing data to also combine that churn analysis. Well, what do you have to do that? You need to buy more data warehouse, okay? And that can be expensive just to do a churn analysis where you don't need that type of performance. So what this particular company did is they got a Hadoop cluster. Actually, I think we, not at Hadoop Summit, but I did I think it's a Hortonworks.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, anyway.
To them.
No, I was thinking, I presented with them. But anyway.
Hadoop is Hadoop.
They put a cluster together. They brought all of that data in, including moving the data from the data warehouse so it could be combined, and to do a more sophisticated, more accurate churn analysis. And so we do see a lot of Hadoop use cases is just combining data that wasn't economically feasible to combine in the past.
Looking at our traditional data, typical structured CRM, ERP data, combining that with new sources, I think is compelling. So
the other thing I just wanted to quickly mention is some of the open sources of data out there. Open data from government sources, from industry organizations, things like that. That's something that I think enterprises need to really start considering more, and it would be great to make it easier to get that data. Data marketplaces, someplace I can go and find some of these easily accessible data sets and bring them into my environment. I think that's another important step we need to take as an industry.
And we're starting to see it in enterprises as well, Jeff, where people are actually starting up kind of a data marketplace internally for the enterprise, right? So almost a private data marketplace, which is interesting. I know Microsoft is doing a lot of work for an external public one as well. Let me shift a little bit from the data, guys. That's really good stuff. So I work at a Hadoop vendor. I work at Hortonworks. Our competition is taking on money. There's a lot of vendors in this space taking on money. Seems like the VC community, I guess you can go there and say, I got a big data app, they'll give you $6 million these days, right? Lots of money in the VC community. There's also a lot of attention from some really big players. Basically every gorilla in the data center has focused attention on Hadoop and big data, right? And so it's not just money, it's resources as well as now being kind of poured into and focused on in the Hadoop market. What does this do for it, right? How is this going to affect the Hadoop market? Maybe from the Hadoop vendors, how Hadoop is being used, and then maybe more broadly, how does it affect the community as well? I'm kind of interested. So kind of two questions in one. I think Jeff, you went last. So Tony, you haven't talked in a while. You're always good.
It's been a couple days now. But both elation and concern, I would say, is my my reaction to this, which is on one hand, it's an incredible show of support, of belief in in part of the financial community that Hadoop really is becoming the next enterprise platform. When I say the next, not talking about that's the only enterprise platform, but it's the next new platform to become part of the enterprise data platform ecosystem. That said, I am a bit concerned in terms of whether the amount of money that's going in here into this market might be in the short term overinflating expectations. You take a look at what the installed base. When I talk installed base, I'm not talking about companies where basically someone has downloaded it, is playing with it, or, and is not paying for distribution. Now, admittedly, let's say in digital media companies, internet companies, you'll probably see a lot of that because technology is their business. But if you are with, let's say, a public enterprise, it's part of your fiduciary responsibility that whatever software you use to run your company, you need to pay for it. You need to basically, get paid support. Otherwise, you are basically acting not in the interests, of your shareholders. And so, basically, if we take a look at what the total paid, in terms of number of companies, not number of installations, I would say probably between you guys, Cloudera, MapR, whoever, Pivotal, that we're probably talking maybe optimistically north of about 1,000 subscriptions these days. And it's growing quite markedly. I mean, you guys are growing, are adding roughly, was it like 50 or 60 per quarter, something like that, on top of a base of a few hundred. That's pretty sharp. We're getting to hockey stick growth. That being said, we're in sharp growth, but it's still a tiny portion of the ultimate market, which is great in terms of it's a huge greenfield opportunity. On the other hand, with all this money being poured in, and at least almost close to $1 billion just with Hadoop platform vendors alone, not including all the other big data vendors in the ecosystem, that I'm afraid that in the short term, I mean, even if let's say we grow geometrically next year, will a few thousand installs be enough to satisfy the investment community that this thing is producing on its investment? I'm hoping that that the community has a little bit more of a long-term view on this. I'd say that within 5 years, basically, in terms of critical mass, maybe a little less than that, but say 5 years, be conservative. I think that is realistic. But if they're expecting critical mass within the next year or two, I hope that I put it this way, I hope those are not the expectations. So that's actually, I think, my biggest concern at the moment. I'm sure that you guys see that in your figures over at Wikibon.
Absolutely. I think, the reason you're seeing all this money being pumped into the market is, I think finally all the gorillas, as you call them, understand that this is the future. This is the direction the market's going, and there's no point fighting it. With maybe one exception I can think of, all the big vendors have really gone in on Hadoop and understand that if they want to continue to kind of lead their various market segments in 20 years from now, they have to get on this train now. It takes a while. This is going to take a while to develop, and if they want to have a seat at the table and kind of help shape the direction of Hadoop and some of the related things that sit around Hadoop, they need to get involved today. And I think that's why you're seeing all that money being pumped in there. That said, certainly, it's not, again, it's the technology vendors, with all due respect to Hortonworks and Cloudera and everybody, the market's going to, there's quite a market there and quite an opportunity for those players. But ultimately, the value generated by people who actually are using Hadoop to run their businesses, to develop new businesses, is going to drastically be larger than what the revenue that vendors drive.
And I think it's a great point, Jeff. And before we come back to you, Mike, I put a little slightly different slant on it. And you're an ex-developer, open source advocate. This is open source software. I mean, Tony, respect me. I mean, I totally respect, but 1,000 or so subscriptions those are people who are paying for it. What's the size of the market beyond that, right? Because this is a technology that's out there. I mean, I ran into the guys from Sprout Social last night. They're using HDP and Hortonworks, and they're all happy with it. They're not paying us, and they're a customer. We're so happy that they're there. How do you start to size that? I mean, it's got to be a tricky boat for kind of an analyst to start to understand that. And how big do you think that is, kind of?
I don't know. I don't study how big that is. When we did the wave, we asked 2 questions and researched those. How many paying customers do you have, and how many non-paying, right? Because we wanted to tease out what that looked like. And confirming sort of the growth rates in the number of paying customers is there. don't think there's any question that this is going to be a huge market. I don't know if enough money has been put into it at this point, because I think this is a disruptive platform. This is like an RDBMS platform. Every enterprise needs it, probably more than one cluster, and they're going to be using it for lots of applications, both analytical, but increasingly transactional as well as the technology improves. So it's huge.
Streaming analytics, all that stuff
Absolutely.
is happening.
Yeah, I would just add, the number of paying customers that have installed Hadoop in their data center isn't necessarily the only or the most important metric. I think what's going to be more important is how many people are consuming data that at some point touched Hadoop. I think as we go forward, it's going to be less about, oh, you've got Hadoop in your data center. It's going to be more about the insights. And yeah, Hadoop's going to be powering that, but I think there's going to be a whole ecosystem of service providers that are abstracting away that complexity, using the cloud. I mean, where Hadoop, that's one area I really want to see some more exploration on, is where Hadoop is a service, and making it more consumable to a wider spectrum of people who don't know what Hadoop is, don't even care to know what it is. They want the insights, but they're not necessarily interested in the technology.
Yeah,
definitely
I don't want
gonna
to
be a
code
no-brainer.
MapReduce.
Yeah, and I mean, the real money that has to be spent is by the other technology vendors. I mean, you made a point like SQL in Hadoop versus
Yeah.
on Hadoop. So there's innovations on top of it, but then there's technologies that have to run in it, inside of it. And a vendor who says, "Oh, well, I connect to it," okay, that's really no big deal. But when you can start to take advantage of Yarn and running inside of Hadoop, there's lots of engineering investment that almost every technology company is
Imagine
making.
linear scale compute and storage for SaaS analytics, something like that.
Right.
I mean, it changes the economic game for the buyer.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, this has actually been a vector both in terms of adoption and also in terms of basically the generation of startups. I'm based out of New York, and I should say that during the dot-com bubble, I'm in New York. I was in exile in the Boston area, and
I'm sorry.
Well, hey, we all have to make sacrifices.
Sit between two.
Yes, exactly. I know. I might get out of here alive. So I do sense sort of a similarity in terms of the energy, but I think what's different this time is that with the cloud, it is an accelerant both for basically startups, because you don't have to buy that infrastructure. You just need a good idea that you can sell. And of course, obviously, for the greater mass of companies that are not going to necessarily have that expertise on staff. So I think that certainly is a big difference this time. I see that energy, in New York with all the meetups, and it's just impossible for me to keep up with all of them. I try and get to at least a couple a week, but just the energy that I'm seeing there just sort of reminds me of what I saw during the dot-com era. But in the dot-com era, it was much more concentrated. And guess what? It's not just in New York. It's in Austin. It's in obviously it's out here. It's in Denver. I mean, it's in many places because by nature with the cloud, this becomes decentralized. In terms of enterprise adoption, the cloud is definitely going to make it far more accessible, especially if you're dealing with data that never got into the four walls of the enterprise to start off with.
But isn't it interesting that even though cloud theoretically makes it easier, that most enterprises are bringing it in-house?
Yeah.
And a
Big
lot of people,
enterprises.
Big enterprise. And a lot of people ask me, why do you think that's, and I think it's because they want to get it on their resumes.
Yeah.
Right? The technical people, it's like,
Yeah.
they don't want it to be abstracted away and they don't want it to be easy. They want to get their hands dirty so they can put it on their resume.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got a little story on
But
that.
I think once that happens, then I think the value proposition of cloud.
Yeah.
Then because once it goes to production, CIOs they say, is there a cloud way to do this? It's like a standard question now,
Yeah.
right? And so once you see this momentum towards productionizing it, then I think cloud will make a lot more
I've
sense.
got a little bit of a story on that, which
Yeah.
is that I was doing our clients. I mean, my company is actually based in the UK, and our clients are primarily EMEA and Asia Pac. And I was doing actually a tour of in Asia Pac actually back last fall, and I was in Kuala Lumpur, and this was an insurance company, and the official problem was, can we get Informatica to still support AS400 version 2? I mean, which shows and in certain industries, I mean, it's not just in Malaysia, there's the reality of it. There's some very old legacy. But on the other hand, there were these young guys in that meeting who kept coming, just like, how can I get into Hadoop? How can I get into Hadoop? My first answer to them was, go to a meetup first. But also,
No, download it.
exactly. The second step is download. You can work with it on your laptop. The third step is work with open data, because that data is there, and this is one way you can. And actually, at that point, even if your company is not exactly going to be supportive, there's probably some nonprofit project out there that you can get involved with that like some sort that's related to like livable cities or something like that.
And related to that
Yeah.
is, here's a question that I never get asked by clients. What's the ROI on Hadoop? They don't care, right? I mean, are you guys seeing the same thing? It's like
They're asking us.
This is they're asking you. But it's just not a top question when it comes to Hadoop. It's a much and I haven't seen a technology-driven trend like this in a long time, right? A lot of it they just want to bring this in. I need to do big data. I need to do Hadoop, and
It's related to that. I think there's an inherent, some of the inherent value of something like Hadoop is that you don't know what you don't know. And the fact that storage is essentially, the price of storage is basically zero at this point. And as you said, compute is coming down close to zero. And the idea that you can put all this data in here, I don't know what the value of it is today, but I know it could potentially be quite valuable.
Right.
That is a different animal than we're used to. And calculating ROI based on some unknown is a challenge, but when you've got the cost to get started are so small and the potential benefits are so large, it makes ROI in the immediate term not quite as an important thing.
Guys, there is no free lunch. And I agree with you that, that basically to get into this and to be able to do something, the barriers are so much lower. But there will always be an opportunity cost in terms of, could you have spent some time on that AS400 just getting the normal business tour? Now, of course, it could be asked. Is it more important for you to be, to work on basically just keeping the lights on versus maybe we can find some new business for this insurer? And so, there will always be that tension. But the fact is that there's nothing that's, it's getting close to zero, but it's not zero. We have to factor that, and that's part of basically managing expectations. So, it just goes back to that.
Yeah.
So guys, we only have about 7.5 minutes left. I would love to open the questions, but I have actually one burning question that I had to ask you guys. There's a lot of hype, right? And you guys are analysts, you're in it as well. I'm sure, I'm a vendor, I'm guilty of it, I guess, right? We're writing a lot of stuff, we're getting a message out. How do you help customers and those who ask you separate signal from noise? I actually asked Merv Adrian one day from Gartner, I'm like, hey, did you read this press release? He's like, Jim, I can't read all that. Are you kidding me? The fire hose is too fast here. This Hadoop market is nuts, right? So, I guess, how do you guys find signal from noise? I want to know, I guess. But more importantly, how do you help, people in the room actually start to understand that?
I'll quickly just say, the wave that we do, the
Of course.
Forrester wave, where we create
Distill it, I like the
criteria,
wave.
and we evaluate it based upon, transparent scales and so forth. So that's one. But then also just the buyers. Yeah. I'm talking to buyers about Hadoop, answering their questions, hearing their stories several times a week. So that's how you kind of verify what's actually going on.
It really comes down to blocking and tackling, and of course, reading all the Hortonworks press releases. Couldn't resist that. But seriously, basically, Hadoop is becoming another enterprise system, and so and such. Part of separating signal from noise is, does this vendor do the things that enterprise vendors are expected to do? Do they deliver what you expect an enterprise vendor to deliver, whether it be support, whether it be basically product upgrades, whether it be basically helping you solve issues with partners? It's the same type of thing as whether, let's say, you're dealing with, with like Oracle and Teradata or IBM, and basically you guys are no longer in the back room as that backroom system run by a few Python programmers and statisticians. It's now basically an enterprise system. And this is going to require support. So it's the blocking and tackling. That's what I would look at is the vendor basically doing that.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that. And another thing I would say is we're far enough along in this market now that all the vendors, Hortonworks, Cloudera, et cetera, have customers. Ask for reference customers. Who can I talk to in my industry with a similar use case, with a similar some similar characteristics, and speak to them without the vendor in the room. If the vendor can't facilitate at least a handful of those conversations, I'd be wary.
I agree totally. So, thank you guys. Are there any? Like, I could take probably one question or so. Let me come down. Sorry, I only left 5 minutes, but you guys talk a while. We had somebody raise their hand back here first. Sorry. There you go.
Thank you. Mike, I don't know if I misunderstood you. Did you say that the ROI doesn't matter? I'm not sure I understood you, because I know Jeff said the ROI that is going to be created by the users is going to outpace what the vendors are getting, the market the vendors are creating. Can you clarify
What I meant
that?
is that when people ask me about Hadoop, they're not asking about ROI or the business value of it per se. They're just interested in how to adopt it, what are the best practices, the difference between the vendors. I spend a huge amount of my time explaining what data science is and what predictive and advanced analytics is. So there's already been a calculation that they've done that they're interested in this platform. And I haven't seen, the reason I called it out is because I felt it was a bit unique. Like when mobile phones first came, people were like, oh, should I develop a mobile app? Like, what's the ROI? And then there was a certain momentum. That momentum where enterprises just say, you know what, I need to do something with Hadoop, I believe that momentum has just happened a lot faster.
So it's because they believe in the ROI already, or is that they believe they have to do it, or they're going to be like outdated in technology?
I believe they understand that Hadoop is a disruptive platform. It's something that they have to have eventually as part of their data management environment. And I think it's also being driven not just by it's not like business driven as much. Sometimes there's a business need for it, but there's also technology, IT people just bringing it in, just like they often bring in open source because they want to bring value to the business. So it's very much a technology-driven trend, not only a technology-driven trend, but it is a technology-driven trend, unlike other things we've seen.
ROI is an age-old question. I used to put out a journal which was looked at cost of ownership and ROI. It was basically a thankless task. But basically, I remember even going back to like the era of like MRP2. Can you cost justify MRP2? No, you can't, because basically, what is ROI? You're saving money on something. And so yes, there may be some savings that you might get when you can eliminate a human, but that's not really the real gain. And actually, I don't think anybody seriously has been looking at enterprise systems for ROI for at least about 20 years, because you can't justify it on those circumstances. You have to put a system in because you absolutely need the functionality, the visibility that system can give you. So I think basically it's not going to be any different. I mean, I agree with Mike here. I don't think it's going to be any different with with Hadoop or big data. It's really more strategic.
I mean, the one thing you do hear occasionally is they try to do a calculation between what an enterprise data warehouse appliance cost versus Hadoop, but that's sort of a false comparison.
Yeah.
And I can't explain
Yeah, I mean, guys,
why, 'cause we're out
of course
time.
we're getting the questions as well, and it's
sorry?
ROI is always very important, right?
Yeah,
So
I mean, I
it's
think when
not-
you look, ROI is important, and to the extent that you can identify as you're getting started, you can identify projects where you can have a quick win and show some return, and that you can quantify. I think that's great. But as I said earlier, the inherent value is sometimes a little fuzzy in a technology and an approach like big data, like Hadoop, because you don't necessarily know what you're going to find. You don't know when that game-changing insight's going to come. That said, you can't base your entire investment on, I hope we find this game-changing insight at some point. You need to balance some of that with some more practical use cases that are going to allow you to have some quick wins, reinvest in the technology, and eventually those aha moments hopefully will come.
Right. So I know we're supposed to wrap, but I want to take one more question. So a quick question, some quick answer.
Hi, I'm Kunal. So first of all, it's encouraging to see that Hadoop is being adopted east of Berkeley. So that's obviously encouraging. And then you said 45% of the people are doing POCs, 18% in production. Out of those 18, 1,000 are paying for it. The rest are probably running Apache Hadoop, right? So it's kind of a question which talks about the hurdles a company has to overcome to really move from POC to production. We touched upon certain points about data not being available. If I'm not a data-driven company, I don't have Twitter feeds, or I don't have sentiment analyses coming from my customers. I have to go get that data first of all. We touched on the expertise part. I don't have all of the hackers sitting down in my office who know how to run MapReduce or anything of that sort. What are the hurdles that a company has to cross from going from POC to production?
So
So guys, let's do one hurdle each, and then I think we're almost out of time.
So
So
I'll-
there's a lot of them, I know.
I'll answer quickly. At Wikibon, we're in the middle of a survey right now, and we asked just that question. And there's, from a technology perspective, there's the things you might expect. Concerns around backup recovery, high availability, things like that. And you need to have those things before you're going to move into a really production use case. And of course, security is important, privacy, especially when you're talking about bringing in critical data, sensitive data from your customers. That you just can't afford to let that leak out. But I think even more important, the biggest kind of, I guess you could say, non-technology challenge or barrier we found is selling the business on the value of the insights and communicating that to them in a way that they want to consume it and in a way that they actually can take action on it. So for us, those are some of the biggest barriers we're seeing right now.
I'll just add to that to say that basically I think the biggest barrier in addition to this is very domain specific, which is, what questions should we be asked? What data should we look at? Because if you get enough of it, you can find a pattern in almost anything. And so just to make this short, because I know we don't have much time, I'd say that is, on top of all the infrastructure stuff that Jeff's talking about, I'd say just understanding the data, knowing what questions to ask is probably the biggest hurdle.
And I would just add, we did do a survey on that, and the number one is the age-old number one when it has to do with data, integrating data from multiple heterogeneous data sources. Just getting it all together. That's the number one technical challenge. The number one business challenge is the business knowing to understand those questions. And I'll just give you a quick example. Thanksgiving, say you were a business person and you wanted to know which people are going to host Thanksgiving and which people are going to be guests, right? You notice how they always market to people as if they're going to throw a grand feast? Yeah, you need this place where. So if a business person goes to IT and says, hey, can you give me a list of the people who are hosting versus guests? They'll probably look in the data model and they'll say, no, I don't have that field, right? And don't ask me any more stupid questions. You knew I didn't have that field, right? If that same business person asked a data scientist, the data scientist would say, maybe. Yeah. Maybe I could answer that question with a certain probability, but right, and then do data science on Hadoop or any other platform that can do data science. I'm done. Sorry.
It's an awesome example, Mike. I think people are asking things of data that they didn't even think of saying before. Right?
But that's the barrier. The business doesn't know they can ask those questions.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I personally thank all three of you for joining us today. So a big round of applause for our panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.